In this session, we're going to talk about the production module, specifically the setting up of work centers and routings prior to establishing work orders and using those files. So we're going to start off in the production module, and we're going to start off in the data entry module. So now if we start with work centers where we define the different steps and the operational steps we're going to use. A work center can be anything you decide it to be. It can be a machine, it can be a cell, it can be a group of people. Whatever you define a work center to be as where something goes through the shop floor, that's what we'll use. Now you can have as many work centers as you want, and you can call them whatever you want. If I select the work center and show my whole list, you can see I've got a ton of work centers here that have been used in this module. But we'll pick manufacturing for right now. So we've got the work center ID. We have a checkbox that defines this as whether it's an outside processing step or not. Outside processing obviously is where you send something attached to a P off to a separate an outside vendor or something like that. And you might have one outside processing step that everything goes through on your work order, or you can set up separate outside processing steps maybe for each vendor, so you have a unique identifier to which vendor is linked to which outside processing step. You can inactivate this work center, and that doesn't stop it from being referenced anywhere, but it does stop it from being used as a new work center. You have a description, which is an unlimited description. We have a scroll bar out here. If I right click and view in a dialog box, you can see the whole thing at one time. You can have it go down. You can have lines for people to fill stuff in. You can have other text in there, whatever you want. And again, it's an unlimited field. These descriptions, this information we're setting up will load onto the routing when we use the work center, and ultimately load into the work order when the routing gets loaded, and then they can be tweaked or changed specific to each work order as needed. So we've got departments, daily hours. A lot of these are used for defaults. Pre and post operation hours, also called move and queue time, which affect the overall scheduling at a work center, but doesn't affect the costing. Setup hours, crew size, and then ultimately the run hours that are used on a routing will affect the costing, and we'll get to that in a minute when we get to the routing steps. Now, in addition to just scheduling, we also have some costing mechanisms in the work center. You can have a standard labor rate and a current labor rate for the rolling up standards. And then you can have overheads, a fixed overhead and a variable overhead applied to each dollar of labor that gets applied. Additionally, we have some capacity settings that are used in conjunction with the capacity planning module. In other words, starting on January 1st, 08, we had 8 hours a day in this. The reason there's multiples here is it might be on 6/30/24, I'm going to move to 12 hours. So that way, when you get to 6/30, it automatically rolls in capacity to a 12-hour day. It gives you more capacity. Shifts start and end, break periods that are all affected in the labor collection and the time and attendance. And then obviously, just like a lot of other screens, there's a change history tab that shows us what the change history, who changed what and what they changed. So it's easy to see that. So this is the setting up of the work centers. This is mostly a one-time setup. You can obviously add or change or manipulate work centers as you're going. Once you get your list of work centers, I'm going to say no, I'm going to save this without changes. Then you put those together in a routing. Now, a routing record is a list of work centers in the order you want the process to go. For instance, I could have a routing established for each assembly number. So each assembly could have a unique routing. And in that case, I would have the routing number the same as a part number. It's also possible to have a generic routing assigned to multiple part numbers. So you may have 100 different assembly numbers that all use the same routing. You can establish a single generic routing for that group and assign it in the parts master screen, and then it'll use that routing, and that's just basically gives you less maintenance in the routing.e screen. Now, when you get the routing, you have your operational steps, you have your work centers at those steps, you have the description that gets loaded in from the work center entry screen, and you can see, like the other one, we have it's a larger box, but for real estate purposes, we only show you a certain amount. If you want to see the whole thing, you can right click and see it in a dialog box. Start and end effectivity dates if you want to use phase in and phase out uh, concepts for moving or adding and removing line items in a routing. The number of setup hours that it's at this work center. So when I get to this work center, it takes 1 setup hour, and then it takes 12 hours per unit, or per lot size, I should say. So it would be per unit, but in this case, my lot size is 10. So I got 12 hours per 10, or it's an hour 20 per unit, basically. So you can handle it either way. The reason you might want to use lot size is sometimes, especially in the electronic assembly industry, run hours you got to get below 0.01 in order to make any sense. So you have to factor it by a lot size. And then there's a crew size, and then you've got all these fields. And again, you have an unlimited field here, so there's no limit to the number of work centers you can have. We do have a history tab that shows you what history was done on this screen through ECNs. So if the screen was updated by an ECN, it'll show you which ECN updated. And then, of course, there's attachments, just like in most other entry screens in the system. So this is the establishment of a routing, which is a list of work centers that you're going to use. Now, once you get those all set up, there are inquiries and reports. So I can scroll down and look at the work center inquiry. And basically this says, show me every place where a work center is used. So it shows me every routing. So this is basically a where used, if you will, for the work center and all the routings it's used in. So this is a handy little report. I can look at the routing report. If I run this down and say, for those of you who aren't familiar, preview on screen just gives you a text mode representation on the screen. So if I say, let me see that routing we created, you can use an effective date if you're using those phase in and phase out options we spoke about earlier. When I run the process, it shows me what the routing looks like in a text mode representation. If I want to run this to a printer, or if I want to see what it looks like, if I were to go to a printer, I can choose PDF, and it will then generate the PDF document. And this is what it looks like on a printer if you were to send this out. So this gives you the results of that report. Lastly, there is a work center report as well. If you wanted to run a list of all work centers, you can do that here. This will list all the work centers. And once you get work centers and routings all set up, then those feed into the work order process that we'll cover in another session. So thank you very much.